is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 782. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Las Vegas, Nevada, it's Paul Cheon. Paul, I got to see you like yesterday, right? Or was that yesterday? 2 days ago?
It was a couple of days ago. It was a lot of eating. It was a great time. Got to watch the NBA Cup. It was really fun.
That was an awesome trip. It was great to see you in real life as well. I get to talk to you all the time, but it's always nice to hang out. Paul and our friend Jay and we did a bit of a food tour. we hit the good stuff too. What was your highlight? What was the best?
Everything. You know what? Actually, for me, because we've done the Lotus thing a bunch and it was good. But for me, it was that noodle place that we went to, Shang's Noodles.
Artisan
that is
noodles.
Now on my list, and I told Lisa about it, and I think we're gonna go eat it on Monday once I take the kids to go get their haircut. So we're gonna run it back, but that is on my list. The way that they cut the noodles, the hand cut noodles, oof.
Yeah,
I'm already thinking about it, getting hungry thinking about it.
I now I am too. Paul got the hand shaved noodles, and then I got the hand pulled where they stretch the dough by hand and turn them into noodles, and then they make a beef soup there. Really, really good. Jay found that place. Amazing. And we went there last time and went there this time as well. Great trip. And we got to watch some good NBA action. But you know what? We got work to do, Paul. We're back in action. We're going to be talking some Pioneer Masters here. We're going to go over the format overview for it this time. And that means that you're going to get our first impressions after having drafted the set for a while now, what decks have been working for us, what haven't, and big picture stuff as well. Before we do, we want to thank Ultimate Guard for their sponsorship of the show. If you need to pick up something for a Magic playing friend, family member, maybe even yourself, you can head over to ultimateguard.com to check out their full range of products. This is really cool because it kind of transcends any individual format, set, play, whatever. You know, regardless of what format you love, if you're a commander player, a drafter, constructed, whatever, you need to protect your cards and you need to protect your collection and your decks. And Ultimate Guard has the best products in the world to do just that. Sleeves to protect individual cards, deck boxes to protect decks, and then ways to transport and hold even multiple decks at the collection level as well. UltimateGuard.com. Again, you can check out their products there. And if you'd like to pick one up, you can find it at your favorite online retailer or your favorite local game store. We also want to say thank you to each and every person who supports us on Patreon. It really means a lot, and we really appreciate it. It's patreon.com/limited resources. One of the things you get for being a patron of the show is you get access to our Patreon question of the week thread. This one comes from Mark, who says, this one's for Paul. Okay. Why is Paul's name Haumph? Is there a story behind that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a very deep story, but the Haumph is just kind of a term that is thrown around in the Magic community. I think it kind of started maybe about 15 years ago, but basically it was just the term that you use for taking an abnormally large bite out of food. And back in the day, and maybe even still now, I was known for my eating prowess. So I just love to eat. I love just... You know, I would regularly, even when I lived in Davis with Luis, at Subway, they would have a buy one, get one footlong Subway sub free combo. And I would just smash 2 footlongs for a meal every single day. It's also how I gained 40 pounds in a year. But anyways, I think the nickname was well-deserved. And so I decided to embrace the name of Haumph because I loved to eat.
Think about it next time you're about to take like a huge bite out of a sandwich that's maybe like built a little too tall, but you're about to just crush it. That's the say, Haumph. That's all that means right there. Yeah. We did some Haumphin down in Vegas on the weekend, no doubt about it. Let's do a couple of crack-a-packs of Pioneer Masters here, Paul. This will give us a chance to talk a little bit about some of the picks and how we're approaching the format and that type of stuff. We'll get into more detail later, but this is always a good way to start the conversation. Our first Pioneer Masters Crack-a-Pack pick is Simic Guildgate. And this is, of course, an important one because you'll see these gates in the packs every single time. And as it turns out, the Gates deck, I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but it is important in the format as it has become, in many ways, a go-to. You will see, if you draft this format, you will 100% see multiple versions of the Gates deck in your run towards 7 wins. And every single time you open up a pack, you are going to be staring at one of these guild gates. And if you are either looking to be in that archetype or you already are in that archetype, you're going to have to run the little algorithm in your brain that says, do I take the gate or is there a card in this pack worth taking?
Yeah. And I think the guild gates in general are something that you don't really want to be taking early. But once you kind of settle yourself into the gate archetype, let's say you have 2 or 3 of the payoff cards, depending on your color needs, you can take them a little bit higher, but certainly wouldn't be looking to take it first pick. Now, notably, Simic Guildgate is one where you kind of look at it because there's the Gatebreaker Ram, you have Guild Summit, there's several gate cards, and the blue-green deck often wants to be multiple colors. Right, you want to be converge/gates, and so Simic Guildgate kind of slots nicely into those color combinations. So it's a fine card, but this format is fast, Marshall. So I'm not super excited about just taking any tap lands that early.
Yeah, it is very much a choice. Like you can't. I think that's not true for most people that play based on what I see. I think they just snatch up gates early, often, and just start rolling with it. But I think if you are concerned about trying to get as many wins as you can, you should be pretty picky about how highly and how often you're taking guild gates. Next is Oath of Gideon. There's a lot of cards in the set that are either completely forgettable / you don't really look at them. And then there's these ones sort of in the middle, like Oath of Gideon, which have implications that go beyond what the card says on it, but not really for us. This is 2 and a white for a legendary enchantment, and when it enters, you create 2 1/1 white core ally creature tokens. And then, like in this case, it says each planeswalker you control enters with an additional loyalty counter on it. And it's just like kind of throwaway text. This is part of the week 1.5, the stage 1, whatever you want to call it, bonus sheet that will be changing out. There's 3 separate ones, and the first one is planeswalker centric for some reason, and this is an artifact of that. I found this card to be completely ignorable.
Yeah. Also, I am with you with the why is this planeswalker centric? So we the first phase of Pioneer Masters, there's just going to be way more free wins because you just have access to way more planeswalkers that you can get access to. But that does make it so that you could maybe get a little extra fringe value off of the various oaths that exist. But you also have to judge these cards by its face value, and paying 3 mana for 2 1/1 tokens is not where you really want to be. So this is just not a card that I'm super interested in. Even if you have a planeswalker and give it 1 extra loyalty, are you really doing it?
It's like, so
I don't
what?
think I don't think the payoff is quite there. So Oath of Gideon is not something I'm too interested in.
No, the only time when I could see playing this card is if you're trying to build the Sphere of Safety deck, which is a fringe niche archetype that's not even good.
You did one.
I did. I had one where I had a bunch of them. I did some dirty stuff with that deck. But this would be the type of card that you'd want because it effectively is a creature, although a bad one, but it leaves an enchantment behind to up your enchantment count. And that's kind of the key to those type of decks. But I mean, we're so far down the weeds at this point, that it's just not right. Next is Commune with the Gods. That's the 1 in a green sorcery. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You can put a creature or enchantment card from among them in your hand and the rest go in your yard.
So this can be a powerful way to fuel your graveyard, particularly if you're the Golgari deck and you have some things that care about scavenge and you do have some recursive elements in your deck. There are formats where this could maybe be pretty good. I would say that this format might not be one of them just because of the aggressive nature of the format, Boros and Rakdos namely being some of the top performers in this format, and they're both pretty aggressive, and you simply just can't take a turn off on turn 2 and not develop your board in any way. So that's why I don't like this as much. But I do think if you are the Golgari deck, let's say you have some Gurmag Anglers and some Dragmanglers, and you could kind of play this as a one-of in your Golgari decks. But this is not a format where I think you can really get away with too many copies of this card because of the aggressive nature.
Yeah, totally. It's a spin your wheels card. You have to be hammering all of the things about it. Like you have to have tons of targets and you have to really care about stuff in the yard. Next is Philology Archaeologist. This is the 1 in a blue 0/3, and when it enters, you mill 3 cards, and you can put a non-creature, non-land card from among the milled cards into your hand. But if you don't, you get a +1/+1 counter on the Archaeologist.
I love this creature. I think this might be one of the, at first I just thought this would be a nice role player. This might actually be one of the best blue commons in the set, which is saying something here, because you first look at it and you're like, oh, it's a 2-mana 0/3. Well, you know what? In a lot of your Dimir control decks or maybe a blue-red spells deck, this is just often going to hit something. And so 2 mana for an 0/3 that gets you a spell is great. But not only that, this is the way that you want to fill up your graveyard, right? You get something back, you put 2 cards in your graveyard, and that helps you cast your delve spells. You can cast your treasure cruises or Gurmag Anglers, or just fill up your graveyard to get things back with cards like the Possessed Scop. So this is the exact type of 2-mana card that I want to play to fill up my graveyard and get me value over something like Commune with the Gods. Also, 4 toughness is a sizing that is really relevant in this format. So there have been instances actually where I've cast this card on turn 2. I'm playing against a Boros aggro deck. I could get a spell, and this is going to hurt you, Marshall.
No,
I can get a spell, but I chose to put the +1/+1 counter on this.
You changed,
just
man.
to survive. You know what? Hey, what are you going to do when they play a turn 2 Rimrock Knight?
That's
right.
True.
You got to get that 1/4 in play. So I do like this card a lot, and I value this very highly. But of course, you do have to be mindful of the creature to spell ratio in your deck, just because when you're trying to play a bunch of Philology Archaeologists, you probably want to be playing something like 10 spells at least to be able to make sure that you can hit with this card.
Next up is Evolving Wilds, which doesn't have a great home in the format because of all the gates. Next is Glade Cover Scout. That's the green 1/1 hexproof. It's there to do the battle cruiser style thing where you just pile up a bunch of auras onto it. I have seen a couple of people attempt it. I have never seen it be good. Yeah,
I mean, this goes into, I guess, if you want to build a green-white heroic deck, you can put Unflinching Courage on this and then a Leaf Crown Dryad and really just try to go to town because it has hexproof. But I haven't had too much success with this card yet.
Me neither. And I don't really fear it either. I mean, the truth is that these type of strategies are just too inconsistent because you need the Glade Cover Scout early. It would turn, say, 1 or 2, it has to hit the battlefield. And then you need to make, you're starting from a very low point. It's only a 1/1. So one aura, it usually just gets it up to speed with the other stuff that's on the battlefield. You need another good aura to really make it an issue. And realistically, it has to be able to attack and it has to have lifelink at some point, or else, you're just trying to race and it doesn't really work out that well. So to me, that is too fragile of a strategy to make it worth it. And, you're better off just going for something that has heroic. Lagana Band Trailblazers just better most cases because it still has high toughness. It's still hard to kill for some removal. But every time you're targeting it, even with pump spells and other stuff too, it's getting bigger. And that doesn't happen with the Glade Cover Scout. It just simply doesn't die as easily. Silumgar Butcher. This is the 4 and a black 3/3 with exploit. When it ETBs, you can exploit another creature, and you can give a creature -3/-3.
Yeah, I found this card to just be okay. I actually thought this card would perform a little bit better, but the format is just a little bit too fast. And so oftentimes when you play this, you're just not getting the best exchange. And because you still do have to sack something, and for 5 mana, you get a 3/3 body. So I think this card is just fine, but I think it's behind many of the commons in the set.
Right. That's the problem. It's just slow, leaves behind kind of an understated body. It requires something being on the board that you can sacrifice to make it into a real card. Next is sort of the surprise card of the format. It's Witch's Mark. This is the 1 in a red sorcery. You may discard a card if you do draw 2 cards, and you create a Wicked Rule token attached to up to 1 target creature you control.
Yeah,
I couldn't believe how well this card's performing, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to just look at just pure win rate, this is tied with Dreadbore as the best common in the set, which is wild, right? Because you look at all the good premium removal spells, you look at Dreadbore, Ob Nixilis's Cruelty. Not a surprise that those are among the best cards in the set at common. But this one, well, here's the thing, right? The red aggressive decks are really, really strong. Heroic is a mechanic that's really well supported. And so this is just a red aggressive card that also works really, really well with heroic. And turns out this is exactly what you need to make a Tormenting Voice style card playable, right? You just, the 2 mana to discard a card and draw 2 cards is barely playable. But then you add the fact that there's heroic and also just being able to put a wicked roll on something is pretty relevant. So this card, people should certainly be playing this card far more often than they currently are because it is very, very strong if you're aggressive.
Right. And aggression is definitely one big chunk of the pie here when it comes to the decks that have been winning. Next is Syndicate Messenger. This is the 3 and a white 2/3 flying with Afterlife 1.
Yeah, I mean, 4 mana for a 2/3 flyer is just pretty underwhelming. So this is just not something that I'm super interested in. Wish it was a 3/2 flyer, just so it can hit a little bit harder. But this kind of is a nice bridge card for the blue-white flyers deck or the black-white sacrifice deck. But I think in either archetype, it's just kind of a filler level card just because 4 mana for a 2/3 flyer in this like powered up format is just not where you want to be.
Yeah. Too slow. Next is Wind Rider Patrol. This is the 3 blue 4/3 flyer. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you scry 2.
Yeah, so 5 mana for 4/3 kind of vanilla flying creature in
Just
this
trash.
format. It's really bad.
Super bad.
At least Butcher, you can sack something to kill something. This thing just comes into play and just sits there, and your opponents can largely ignore it a lot of the time too.
Yeah.
Just not what you want.
Way too slow. Dies to all the removal too. Next is Unravel the Ether. This is the 1 and a green instant. Choose target artifact or enchantment. Its owner shuffles it into their library. I have not found this to be main deckable. Yeah. Uncommons. Coordinated Assault. This is red for an instant. Up to 2 target creatures each get +1/+0 and gain first strike until end of turn. Card's been good.
Yeah, really solid. Again, red aggression, heroic. This just triggers everything. Great combat trick. Very happy to pick this up in my red decks.
Next is Thunderclap Wyvern. This is the 2 white-blue 2/3 flash flyer, and it gives other creatures you control with flying +1/+1. I like this one. I
like this one a good amount. Just if you're drafting the blue-white flyers deck and you have 7, 8, 9 flyers in your deck, this thing you can play that into speed. Really, really solid card.
Yeah, it performs really, really well in that deck. I mean, it just fits perfectly. Also, blue and white often have things that they can do at instant speed in lieu of casting the Thunderclap Wyvern. And, even if you only have 1 or 2 flyers beside it, it makes a big impact on the board. And then also, it can even double as a combat trick in some scenarios, which is like, right. It feels really bad if they're like, yeah, I'll trade our 3/3 flyers. And then you're like Thunderclap Wyvern. And they're just like, oh my God, like I'm losing my guy and you have this thing left over still, It has some risk to it, but still. Last uncommon is Scab Clan Berserker. This is the 1 red 2/2 haste renown 1. And whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, if this Berserker is renowned, then it does 2 damage to that player.
Yeah, I just don't like the renown mechanic very much. And I just, in general, hate 3 mana aggressive creatures that have 2 color pips, right? Because you're just never going to be able to cast this. It's just, you need 11 mountains in your deck if you think you can reliably want to play this on turn 3. So I just think for that reason alone, I don't have this card very highly. And all cards that look like this in general, the various Phoenixes that you've seen in the past, they're just value them all a little bit worse than, like, remove half a letter grade at the very least, maybe a full letter grade, just because they perform much, much worse than you think. And Berserker is the exact same. Yeah.
I mean, a good way to put it would be, what if I told you, so the shorthand that we would use for this is that it's a 3 mana, 2/2 haste, whatever. Right. But the reality is that it's a 3.5 to sometimes 4 mana. Sometimes 4.5 mana if your mana is really being grumpy with you, 3-drop, right? So it's not really that cheap. And already you should be skeptical of 3 mana 2/2, right? Even if it has haste, that does trade off. Even if you're the first one to get to 3 mana, oftentimes your opponent's like, land 2, play a 2/2, go, right? And now you're just already staring down at your Scab Clan Berserker, and it doesn't look good. It looks like, well, it's going to trade off for their 2-drop. Like, what? Like, that's definitely not the way to win games of Magic these days. Yes, if you can cast it consistently, and yes, if you can get it through and it gets renowned, it's actually pretty annoying for the opponent. But come on, that's a lot of if. Setup cost way too high on it to be really good.
Right.
Our rare is Spirit of the Labyrinth. This is the 1 and a white 3/1. Each player can't draw more than one card each turn. It's an enchantment as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a card that's kind of directed at constructed and not really something that is going to impact limited all that much. So 2 mana for a 3/1, it's fine, but you can do a lot better in this format.
Yeah. So where do your eyes go here? The Witch's Mark, maybe Coordinated Assault, the Wyvern, maybe. I guess the Archaeologist is the blue card. What do you like here?
You know, I know the Witch's Mark performs well, but I just feel like I never have to take it this high,
right?
Just because I just feel like I just get those kind of late. So I guess to be kind of exploitative there, I would not take the Witch's Mark, and I would be probably looking at one of the blue cards. I do like the Archaeologist a fair amount, but at the same time, I think the Thunderclap Wyvern is one of the best payoffs if you do end up in that color combination. But of course, starting out blue-white is kind of rough. Now, noting that in this format, you're not going to be lacking playables. It's a master set. Just the depth of the cards are going to be pretty deep. So I could see just taking a shot here and taking the Thunderclap Wyvern. But if you wanted to play it a little bit safer, for me, because I like drafting the bluish control decks, I would also just consider taking the Archaeologist.
Yeah, for me, I think I would narrow it down. I agree with you about the Witch's Mark. It would not be on my list, even if it is, one of the best commons, if not the best common. I would be looking at Simic Guildgate. I mean, it would be on my radar. Thunderclap Wyvern, Coordinated Assault. Those are the three cards that I'm like, do I want to just go with the Gates deck? Because one of the calculus that you'll put into play when you are a Gates player, which I guess I am, I'm kind of already sick of it, to be honest. But I do really like strategies like that and drafting like that. It's such a different experience than you get in a normal draft format. Is you do have to do a calculus on, I either take the gate, or if there's a card that says, I need to be taken over Gates, that would go into the Gates deck. And that there actually isn't one here. There's no premium removal in this pack at all. I think the best, most powerful card is the Thunderclap Wyvern, but it's gold and can be tricky. And it doesn't necessarily go in the Gates deck because, it really does want to have flyers to make that card sing, and you don't know what you're going to have, at the beginning. I think today, after having drafted this set quite a few times, I think I would take the Wyvern. I like that deck. It performs really well. It suits my play style. It's well supported. And I just don't mind taking a shot for the reason that you said, Paul, which is that getting to playables isn't that hard. And there's nothing here that's irreplaceable. Like there's no card in this pack that makes me think, I can't take that and then give up on it. Like if I take Thunderclap Wyvern and then I just take some double black spell next, it's like, that's fine. I don't not going to worry about it. But I have already drafted the Gates deck a little too much, and I'm sick of seeing it on the other side of the battlefield too. It's going to become a scourge, I think, pretty quickly, that I think I would just skip the gate this time.
It's the thing is, anytime people look at master sets or just new sets in general, everybody wants to try to do the cool thing. And the Gates deck is definitely the coolest, sweetest thing you can do because the payoffs are so, it tells you to just draft differently than your typical curve out, beat you down, draft some card draw and removal spell, right? It's take a bunch of gates and take a bunch of cards that say gate on it and see what happens. And the problem is, the format is aggressive, and there are also it's overdrafted. So for me, I actually would choose to shy away from the gate archetype unless it's clear that it's open. If I see a fifth pick Gatebreaker Ram, right, or a Gates Ablaze, then I'll move into it. But first pick, I don't think I would like to just take a gate and go, you know what, I'm all in. Unless you just want to force gates, and I can't stop you from doing that. But of course, here we're trying to preach and teach you to become better at limited, and forcing is certainly not where you want to be.
Yeah, and we're going to do a deeper dive on the Gates deck a little later in this episode, just giving you the kind of that calculus that I mentioned, and then what the payoffs are and what you should be kind of working towards, just to give you a framework for it. But generally speaking, I'm with you, Paul. I do think that interestingly, the Gates deck is one of the few archetypes really in like limited at all that you can force. You can say, I am just going to take Simic Guildgate and I will end up with 8 or 9 gates and I will surround them with spells, because as long as you're willing to take those gates early, you will get a certain amount. Like, it is just really hard to get like fully cut off on gates because there's one in every single pack. And then it's a matter of like, what 3 to 5 colors are you in? And it's like, they can't cut you off of everything, right? So even if
it's just the payoffs.
It's just the payoffs.
Like, how many payoffs will you have? And then will playing all the colors actually be beneficial for you? Now you can draft a 4 or 5 color deck in this format. The existence of all these gates, Evolving Wilds, District Guide, Pilgrim's Eye makes it so that you can do the thing. The question is that strategy better than just drafting a good streamlined 2-color deck where you can still have arguably a similar level of power? But the fun thing about drafting the Gates deck, it does kind of feel like you're drafting Cube almost. Yeah. Where you're like, I'm just going to take the lands. I'm going to take the lands. I'm going to take the lands. All right, now I'm just going to play whatever good removal spells I see and just try to figure it all out.
And you know, Paul, I'll say anecdotally, and you know, I've kind of, but when we were getting ready for the show today, I was looking up stuff on 17 lands. I like to kind of keep myself away from it somewhat while I'm developing my own view on the format. And then when we do this episode, I'll kind of dive in and see what lines up with what I've seen and what doesn't. And there's been a number of surprises and a number of things that I'm like, yeah, okay, that's what I was seeing as well. But I will say anecdotally, and I think by the numbers as well, the Gates deck doesn't actually live up. Like, it is not that good. It's in fact very mediocre in all of its versions, from 3 colors with, you know, an extra splash to full 5 color to 4 colors with a splash. You know, all of the different variations on 17 lands, none of them are impressive. They are either at or below average win rate. If they're ahead, it's by like a tiny fraction, like, meaning it's playable, like you're in the mix. It's definitely not one of those things where like you should avoid it, but it's not great. It's not like it stands out as some great deck. And the reason I think that that's the case is because it's all about the payoffs. And we're going to go over all of them, by the way, again, a little later, but the payoffs are all that really matter. Like the idea that you could build a really good deck without the gate specific payoffs just because you are playing 3 to 5 colors and you can cast your spells has not held up. You do not get paid back because, I mean, what did we just say? Witch's Mark is the best common. Like, you will get absolutely ran over if your first 3 to 4 plays are tap lands and then you're playing off curve and maybe you can't quite cast everything. This format is hostile. Like, it is not friendly to those starts. You need those payoffs to make it worth it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, 2 of the top 12 commons in this set are both 1-mana creatures. That should be pretty telling and letting you know how aggressive this format is, right? The Acro and the red 1/1 and the Cloudfin Raptor are both in the top 12. And so Thunderclap Wyvern, as you talked about, I mean, it plays really well into it. You know, I had an awesome blue deck with quad Cloudfin Raptors, a ton of flyers, and then that makes Gust of Wind. Like, Gust of Wind is already a good card.
It's just like when 2 mana all the time.
Flyers deck, it's absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I want. And also Thunderclap Wyvern, even with the Sungrace Pegasus, right? Sungrace Pegasus just needs a little bit of juice, just 1+1/+1 counter, or way to make it big, and all of a sudden that card becomes fantastic. Just having a 2-mana 2/3 flying lifelinker. So I think the Wyvern is powerful enough that it's worth just taking the risk. And if it's not open, it's not open. But if it is, all of a sudden you have one of the best signpost uncommons in the set in your deck.
Let's go over the next Crack-a-Pack. First card up is Azorius Guildgate. So that's the blue-white one. As we talked about. Next is Cavern Lampad. That's the 3 and a black 2/2 Intimidate with Bestow 5 and a black, and the creature gets +2/+2 and Intimidate. Found it to be very mediocre.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, many of the Bestow cards, especially the commons, are just comically bad or underperforming, which is really funny because a lot of these cards used to be quite strong back in Theros when they were around, but just with the speed of the format and the efficiency of the removal spells, they've all just kind of gone down. And Cavern Lampad might be the actual worst one.
I mean, it's horrible, right? Like, I've never seen anybody do anything reasonable with that card. Nantuko Husk, 2 and a black 2/2. You can sack a creature to give it +2/+2. Has it played out well?
I think it's pretty. I do like it in my Rakdos and my Orzhov decks in particular. I don't like it as much in the other archetypes, specifically in blue-black. I think it's quite bad just because you're not going to have enough creatures or fodder to sacrifice. But, if you have some Imperious Oligarchs and the 2-mana 1/2 zombie where you can sack and get value and get something back from your graveyard, I think it's a fine inclusion to play in those decks. I've had it be pretty solid in black-white and black-red. That's where I would take it. I wouldn't take it super highly, but it's a fine, ungated sacrifice is always nice. And if your deck is really kind of pushing into that, it can be fine.
Next up is Zendikar Incarnate. This is the 2 green-red star 4, and its power is equal to the number of lands you control. The only time I found this card to do anything is if you can give it trample with like Garrick's Uprising or, some way to say, hey, this guy has trample. If it does, yeah, I mean, you can have a 6/4, a 7/4 that can be kind of a problem or, be one combat trick away from just sort of taking over. But generally speaking, too slow, too vanilla.
Yeah, this feels like a Foundations card, right?
Yeah,
where it's just like,
it does.
You look at this and you're like, wait, what? This is a signpost common? Is this what this is supposed to be? Because this does not pull me into red-green, I'll tell you that much. It's just a random vanilla creature. Yeah, and it's 2 colors. Yeah, there's just no shot I'm ever taking this early.
No way. Next is Gateway Plaza. This is the one that enters the battlefield, taps for any color, is a gate, but you have to pay a mana when it ETBs. Where are you at on the Plaza? Do you play it like in your Gates decks?
I would prefer not to. I would prefer to just play the other Gates just because the Gates deck is already slow, and this one taxes your mana on top of that, making it so that on turn 3, if you play this, you just can't play a 2-mana spell. That's really brutal. Like the best time to play this is maybe turn 2, I guess. But I just think this slows you down a little too much. Now you'll play it if you have to, if you need the mana fixing. Let's say you didn't quite get there on your Gates deck, or let's say you're playing a 2-color deck that's splashing a 3rd color for a Planeswalker or something. You'll play it if you absolutely have to, but it's probably even worse in the Gates deck, to be honest, because your deck already has a bunch of Gates, and this slows you down even more. Whereas maybe you can see playing this in a Grixis control deck, and you need some extra red mana to splash some Dreadbores or something.
Yeah, I've been playing one in the Gates deck and been fine with it, though everything you said is true. It does slow you down. I mean, I think a well-built Gates deck can handle having a Gateway Plaza in there, and it does solve a lot of problems, like especially if you're going for a really greedy build or one that's particularly mana intensive. I just think that you need to pair it with cards like the next card we have here as often as possible, which it's just definitely true for the Gates deck in general, but with Plaza, it's even more so. Wild Slash is our next card. It's red, instant, does 2 damage to any target, and if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, damage can't be prevented this turn. These are the type of cards that you need in the Gates deck. In fact, how is Wild Slash doing? I assume it's very, very good.
Surprisingly, not in the top 10.
Okay, it's at 57.4. So good win rate, but yeah, it's behind all the more aggressive stuff. That I would guess. In fact, here, let me just do a filter real quick. All decks. I want one for Wooburg. Okay, nobody's actually.
I mean, it's very.
Wooburg. Yeah, this is hard. See, this is where filtering gets a little tricky because, like, what exact 4 colors am I supposed to pick here?
Right.
Like, I guess.
I mean, despite the numbers, I personally will take Wild Slash over most cards, even a lot of the red commons that even have slightly higher win rates. I still think this card is really solid, super efficient, and if you dig deeper into the numbers, it's actually a top 10 common for top players. So it's still just a very, very good card, especially if you want to lean into. For example, you can still draft kind of a controlling red deck, but you're going to need, like a blue-red spells deck. Wild Slash is obviously going to be fantastic there, but this card's never bad. It's just a shock. And I can't remember exactly what happened, but my opponent actually used the Ferocious ability.
Really?
And it was relevant. And I was like, wow, they got me.
Wow,
and I just didn't even expect that.
That's tough.
But yeah. It would be my pick so far, though. It's still just a really great, efficient removal spell. It's good in any deck. It can get a little bit redundant if you have too many of this, right? And you're playing against a matchup that has bigger creatures. But the first one always has pretty high value.
I went through each of the 4-color combos, and it's interesting. And I'm looking at the red commons, and There is no red common that rates high enough as far as, even to show up and have like percentages thrown, except for in one exception, which is the non-white colors. So UBRG. And the only card that has enough sample size to even rate at all is Wild Slash. And it is 62.2% game in hand win rate. So we are going to use that sliver of data and extrapolate it out into all multicolored decks and say that it's very important for that deck. I already know it is. I've played with and against, and
I agree.
You're just going to get ran over. And having cheap interaction for their first play or to break up a potential heroic interaction is massive. Next is Artful Maneuver. This is the 1 and a white. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. And even though there's a lot of things that look like they're flying on this artwork, it doesn't do anything else than just give the creature +2/+2. But it does have rebound, so you get to cast it again. Yep. This is basically, a way to use a combat trick on a heroic creature to win combat, leave something behind, and then just get another free trigger the next turn.
Yeah, I mean, it's a totally serviceable combat trick, but there's just so many other good ways to trigger heroic that give you a little more bang for your buck in terms of the mana investment, where I think this is not something that you take too high. But, certainly if you're drafting a red-white or green-white aggro deck, you could play a copy of this card and it wouldn't be too bad.
Voyaging Satyr is next. That's the 1 and a green 1/2. You can tap it to untap a land.
Yeah, I mean, this card's fine, pretty solid. If you draft the multicolored green decks, oftentimes you're going to be wanting to ramp into something big, and this just allows you to do that. Being able to, or you just even playing a turn 2 Satyr into a turn 3 Gnarlback Rhino is just really strong. So just being able to go from 2 to 4 is nice. So this is just a solid green, because green is usually not the color that's being super aggressive. If you're, let's say, green-white, and you're playing Glade Cover Scouts and want to beat down, this maybe is a creature you want to avoid. But if you're drafting the multicolor decks or blue-green, if you shouldn't draft blue-green, straight up blue-green. But if you do draft any of those decks, then the Voyaging Satyr definitely gets a lot better.
Next is Follow the Hammer. This is the 1 and a red instant. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. And this one is one that you would assume would have a wide range of outcomes based on what deck it's actually in. And that is the case. On average, it's okay. It's above average, I guess would be the way you could put it. It's at 56.2% overall win percent, which is a couple above the average. It fits the format well. To me, it becomes the default red removal spell a lot of the time just because you can get it kind of when you want it.
Right. It's exactly just bite down, right? Except the fact that there's also just heroic that exists in this format, which gives it a little bump in this format just because it's bite down, but also you get to put a +1/+1 counter on your creature, or maybe sometimes you can make a 1/1 haste token. So there's just a few extra applications because of the existence of heroic.
Yeah, it does perform best in red-green where you have the big targets. Next is Wind Rider Patrol, which, as we mentioned before, is trash. Next is Return Centaur. This is the 3 and a black 2/4. When it enters, target player mills 4 cards. What is the use case for this? I have seen it on the battlefield a couple of times and always just been like, probably would have been better off just with anything.
My opponent killed me with this card because I was playing I was playing a control deck. We were both playing a control mirror, and they just played this and targeted me, and I
Return Centaur, the Mirror Breaker.
Look, this card is not good. You should almost never put this card in your deck. So it's just, the body is 4 mana for 3 mana for a 2/4 is not something you usually play anyways. 4 mana for a 2/4 is not great. I guess this is supposed to be something that you play in your black green deck if you've got a bunch of scavenge and delve and stuff, but there are just far better ways to fuel your graveyard. This is just something you don't play.
Dude, there's so many spots in these common slots that are just thrown away.
Yep.
Like, this feels not good. Like, Return Centaur existing here is just baffling. There's no deck that wants it, period. Wind Rider Patrol, same thing. Like, was this supposed to, like, help the Flyers deck or something? Like, it already has a ton of cheaper common Flyers and ways to pump them. Wind Rider Patrol is like completely unnecessary and it feels like it has no, like, what is it? What is hitting your opponent and scrying to? Like, that's just value. That's like this boring vanilla thing that doesn't, like, it just feels like these slots could have been used to actually support actual archetypes. And instead, you know, the supported archetypes are like very supported, like, you know, with Follow the Hammer and Artful Maneuver. Like, these are cards that you may want to play anyway, but they're good versions that fit into decks where Heroic is supported. So it's like, I get it. It makes sense. And Follow the Hammer still gets played in decks that don't have it. And Artful Maneuver is still a serviceable combat tricks even in non-heroic decks. I get it. This is all good. This makes sense to me, right? I don't even hate taking a shot on Zendikar Incarnate. It's just bad, but like, whatever. But
it makes sense. It's like a big, it's got 4 power and it's big. Whereas you look at Return Centaur, Wind Rider Patrol, and Cavern Lampad, and you're like, what are we doing here? What are we trying to accomplish? So yeah, those are just like straight blanks where, especially in a master set, you're just used to having everything kind of hit, right? Or you understand why it's there. And look, I get the Patrol flies and the Centaur mills, and that's why it's there. But there's probably cooler ways to pull that off. Than that. Yeah, Satyr Wayfinder. Right. Or just other cards of that nature.
Right. I you know, it's weird because we get to view these sets just through the lens of limited players, right? Like, I don't have to care that these all had to be reprints or that you can't throw X in here because it goes into Pioneer now, right? I don't care. That's like, in my mind, I'm like, I get to give feedback, I get to complain, I get to praise based on how it is as a limited format, and I have no idea why Return Centaur, Wind Rider Patrol, I don't even know why Nantuko Husk is here. Like, that's not really supported either. And the Lampad's just Lawler skates. I mean, that is just like embarrassing. Uncommons. Coordinated Assault. We already talked about that.
Sure.
Next is Mogus's Warhound. This is the 1 in a red 2/2. It's an enchantment creature, dog, and uncommon. It's got Bestow for 2 in a red, and it attacks each combat if able, and the creature gets +2/+2 and attacks each combat if able. Very aggressive.
It is very aggressive. You basically, the idea is you want to bestow something on one of your cheap things, and then once it dies, you still have something left over. It's fine. But
what does it do? It's playable. That would be the thing.
I at this point so far, my pick is still the Wild Slash.
Basara Tower Archer, green 2/1 hexproof reach. This is very similar, you know, to the Glade Cover Scout type cards, where at least they took a shot, right? They said, hey, we'll give people a chance to do the kind of battle cruiser thing. I don't think it's really working out. Basara Tower Archer being double green and really, really, really needing to be on the battlefield before you start casting the auras. Like, it has to be in that order. If you have to start putting auras on your not hexproof creatures, then, you know, you've kind of missed the boat there. So you must wait until you get double green to cast the Tower Archer. Even though it has reach, it blocks horrendously. Like, it trades, you know, it's got 1 toughness. So that's not good. And then, but again, you know, it can be a canvas on which you can paint, you know, some green-white battlecruiser style deck. But it just suffers from all the things that the Glade Cover Scout style deck does, but it's even worse because you can't cast it half the time.
Yeah, it does just double green. You're just not going to be able to realistically play it. I will say I kind of understand why this could be here. The battlecruiser thing is a thing. And also later on, there's going to be a devotion theme for some of the seeded packs. And, you know, if you want to live the mono green dream, well, this card's going to be a big part of that just because it has the 2 green pips on it.
Yeah. So there's something here. Again, to me, there's a big difference between you took a shot and it missed and what? Right? Like, why is this even here? Like, and this is you're taking a shot, but it probably, at least thus far, has missed. As you said, you know, future iterations of the set with the bonus sheet structure that they have. And just as a reminder, we touched on it, but there's 3 different ones. We're in the first one. The next one's going to be spells, and then the last one's going to be devotion. And we'll see. And maybe that Tower Archer finds its home there. Last card is our rare. It is Niblis of Frost. This is the 2 blue 3/3 flying prowess, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, tap target creature an opponent controls. That creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. It's a good card.
Yeah, this card's fantastic. I mean, 4 mana, 3/3 flying prowess. That's already basically almost there, especially because there's a number of cheap spells in this format. Being able to play Consider or Wild Slash on the same turn that you play this ensures that you'll at least be able to freeze something. But also this just is really hard to rumble if your opponent has any mana available. Yeah, this card is just awesome. Just any blue deck's going to want this. It's also got the flying to go with the blue-white deck. But in any blue deck, you're going to want this. You're probably going to have spells, and you just need to trigger this once, and you're getting a lot of value out of it. So for me, I mean, Niblis of Frost just seems to be the pretty clear pick here in the pack, unless you just love drafting the red aggro decks.
Right. I am curious, if you do love drafting the red aggro decks, like Wild Slash, Coordinated Assault, Follow the Hammer, Mogus's Warhound, you just take the slash?
I think it's the slash. I think it's still just 1 mana. If everybody else, there's going to be other people doing the aggressive thing, and just the fact that you can just double spell, right? You can just have a turn 3 where you go Wild Slash, your 2-drop. Let's say you're on the play. You go 2-drop, they go 2-drop. Turn 3, you just Wild Slash their thing and play another 2-drop. That's just such a huge swing.
Right.
And because the nature of this format is so aggressive, being able to do that is so strong. Or having a card like this that allows you to break serve when you're on the draw against other aggressive decks is really big. And you don't have to be red-white aggro. You're just red.
Right.
And being red and having Wild Slash in your deck is also just a good tool to not getting run over by the red-white or red-black decks.
Totally. It even goes to the face if you need it, to kind of finish things off. Let's talk big picture here, Paul. To me, the format is breaking down. I think of 2 archetypes when I think of the format right now, and what you see when you're actually starting to play your first few turns of each game. And that is gates is very, very prevalent. At this point, I more or less just expect my opponent to play 2 to 3 gates to start the game out of their first, 3 to 4 lands. Or a hyper aggression. I feel like the format has become polarized. I think that for the reasons that you said earlier, a lot of people just want to play gates. Like, it's fun. It feels a little bit like Cube. It's a different draft experience. It is forcible in many ways. And you can come up with something ranging from I got lucky and opened a bunch of good gate payoffs at uncommon and some sweet gold rares or whatever, and I can kind of take over with these, all the way to, well, I mean, I got a Dreadbore and I got this and I can kill your stuff and I have a game plan and I can cast my spells at some point. That's kind of the range of outcomes. And I think that people are appropriately adapting their decks to it, where they're going as all out aggressive as you possibly can. I mean, they want 1-drops. It's just all in. I want you to play 3 tap lands in a row, and I want you to be at 11 by the time the dust settles from that. And now you're in these very high leverage scenarios where, like, 1 well-placed combat trick, 1 well-placed removal spell, all of a sudden can tip the favor where your opponent can't really come back. And those are the 2. Red-white is the most prominent of those, but those seem to be the things, at least in my mind, that when I sit down and I'm about to play, I'm a little pleasantly surprised when it's not one of those 2 styles of deck. What have you been seeing? Yeah,
at least the first week, I think maybe there are some adjustments being made right now where a lot of people are also gravitating towards blue-based control decks. I do see a lot of that as well. It's like, I'm going to just ignore all the gate stuff entirely, and I'm going to have Essence Scatters and Treasure Cruises and a bunch of removal spells that still allows me to be able to keep pace with the really aggressive strategies. But at the same time, you don't need to be 5 colors to get a bunch of value. So you can just draft the control decks, and the gate decks don't necessarily have something that'll go over the top of you unless they have one of the gate colossus. But yeah, I have noticed a similar thing where kind of mid-range is maybe not necessarily where you want to be. You either want to be the blue-white Flyers deck, you curve out, you play your Cloudfin Raptors with Gust of Winds and Triplicate Spirits, you beat them down that way, or you're red-white or green-white, and you're just trying to build up an army, go wide, or you try to draft really, really controlling decks. Whereas drafting something like, for example, Golgari, I don't think is one of the stronger archetypes, just because it kind of sits in the middle, right? You're kind of this mid-range deck, but then you run into a deck that plays Treasure Cruise. What do you do? Right? Or you run into a deck that's playing gates and a bunch of powerful spells, and it's really hard for the black-green deck to kind of gas up and keep pace with what a lot of those kind of over-the-top decks are doing. At the same time, the black-green deck doesn't even necessarily have all the tools to completely slow down the most explosive starts from, for example, the Boros deck. So I think mid-range is kind of where you want to avoid things. But at the same time, you look at the win rates, everything is mostly draftable. I would say that what you really want to avoid, and you never see this, and funny is the first deck I drafted in the format was this. It's Simic. Straight blue-green is never where you want to be. It's the worst archetype to be. Oftentimes, if you're blue-green, that's the gate color combination, or you want to be splashing other things. But if you just go straight blue-green, there is just not enough tools, not enough interaction to stop whatever the aggro decks are doing, and you're going to be much better off just playing removal or splashing another color to have access to interaction, because just straight blue-green is not where you want to be. But all in aggro or pure control or gates, those are kind of the things that I've seen have success.
Yeah, and I think when if you look at the way that the game in hand win rate data breaks down for a lot of the colors, you will see pretty quickly that it skews towards cheap. Right? Like cheap affect the board stuff is definitely where you want to be, in the early stages. There's a few exceptions, that'll pop up here every once in a while where you're like, oh, okay, Heliod's Pilgrim is reasonable in white, for example. And that's a slow card, right? Like that's not what I'm talking about here. But, like unsurprisingly, the best white common is Hero of Erois, which was a freaking rare. So that makes sense. Ardenvale Tactician is up there as well. And, if you look at, I think blue is another good example of this. So you mentioned Gust of Wind. That's number one common. Next is Philology Archaeologist, your boy. And then it's Cloudfin Raptor, Consider, Essence Scatter, Treasure Cruise are the next. So that's the top 6 blue commons. And if you look at what you actually pay for these mana-wise, right? Gust of Wind is somewhere between 2 and 4. We'll call it 3 on average. Archaeologist is 2. Raptors 1. Considers 1. Essence Scatter 2. And Treasure Cruise is probably on average like 3 or something like that. These are cheap. I mean, these are like cheap spells. Like, stuff like Opal Lake Gatekeepers and Nimbus Naiad and, Ingenious Scob, stuff that costs 3 or more mana kind of as a baseline. Those have fallen off. Like those are the filler, or in some cases, maybe even unplayable stuff. And I think that the format's a bit polarized, right? Imagine if you sit down and your opponent's playing gates. Well, what do you want? Well, you want to be like doing stuff, like spending your mana, affecting the board, doing things for cheap while they're dirtling around with their mana base. So then imagine if your opponent, is playing a hyper aggressive deck. Well, it's the same thing. You need to be doing stuff yourself. If you're not one of those two archetypes, you can't be in the middle. If you're in the middle, then the fast decks run you over and the slow decks dominate you in the late game. So you just cannot live in that space. And, the deck you mentioned, the blue-green deck, is kind of the epitome of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the reason why you see such a high win rate on the Archaeologist, because it's a card that's actually fine in both matchups, right? It's a cheap thing that you can play against control. Yeah, you just draw a card, right? 2 mana 0/3. If you draft your deck accordingly, you're just going to get something. But against aggro, you just want that 1/4 gets in the way, because you're going to have inevitability for the most part, because blue just has a lot of tools, a lot of ways to draw cards. So you just play that as a 1/4, and then in the late game, Possess Scob, Treasure Cruise, Sight Beyond, anything to kind of get ahead on cards, you can kind of get that back later. So that's why I think it's really high. And that's one of those things where if you've been drafting a lot of Pioneer Masters and there's a card that you see kind of late that's been doing really well, it's like if you just take Witch's Mark and Philology Archaeologist a little bit higher than you've already been doing, which is probably 7th pick, then you're probably going to be doing better, especially the Archaeologist. That's my boy. That's my card.
So we're talking big picture here on the archetypes. We've mentioned that, like the low to the ground aggressive decks, the gates decks, and maybe that you don't really want to be in Simic specifically. But what are the broad strokes for you that you've noticed, after having played and done a little digging around here? What are the colors and pairs and stuff that are doing the best and worst?
Yeah, so the two color combinations that's doing very, very well are both red. I think red's probably just the best color, especially the aggressive combinations, but it's red, white, and red, black specifically. Red, black has the highest win rate at 59.2%.
That's huge.
And a lot of that comes from the fact that, the red cards are great, but you also have Dreadbore at common. We just haven't had that good of that efficient of a removal spell at common. It just doesn't happen. And the fact that this just kills everything. Also the fact that this kills planeswalkers is just not irrelevant in the first couple of weeks of this format, because you will just run into a planeswalker. If you play a set on Arena, you will run into a planeswalker eventually. And the fact that this does that is really, really nice. So Rakdos is quite strong, but the real standout color combination I feel is still Boros, because Boros is drafted nearly 2 times more than any other color combination in the format, and it's still the second highest win rate archetype. So people are overdrafting this thing, right? But the thing is, red is very deep. The red commons are really deep, and so if you just want to be aggressive in red, it can probably support 3 drafters at a table sometimes. And if that's the case, then everybody's still drafting it, and people are still doing well with it right now. Now, there might be an adjustment period, because I think, like you said, everybody's doing the gate thing. And I feel like the red decks just absolutely feast on the gate decks. So as people maybe shy away from the gates deck, and maybe you should draft black-green mid-range or some of these other things, there could be some kind of balancing out, because you typically do see the aggressive decks do better week 1 and week 2 of the format as people are trying to figure things out. But those are the two standouts, just Rakdos, red, white. Those are the 2 color combinations that are doing really, really well. And then as far as something that you want to actively avoid, we talked about it just before. Simic, just straight blue-green, just don't touch. Just avoid it.
And I think you're right about red being the best color. It looks like it's pretty convincing. The Boros and the Rakdos decks, 59%, 58.2. But the other one that's in the upper tier is blue-red as well. It's at 57%. It's not drafted as much, but again, it's really leaning on the fact that red seems to be kind of the dominant color here, and as you mentioned, even taking over a lot of the commons, the top 10 commons. 6 are red, one of them's Dreadbore. So
7 of the top 10 commons have red mana symbols in them.
Right,
that's pretty wild.
That says a lot for sure.
Right.
What about splashing?
So splashing is easy if you want to splash, because there are gates, there's Evolving Wilds, and there's Pilgrim's Eye. Even if you're not green, with Pilgrim's Eye, which is actually just a very solid common, you can splash if you want to. But the big takeaway here is splash at your own risk, because
or at your own peril.
Or at your own peril, rather.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, it's that bad.
Because the problem is, because the red aggressive decks are the most dominant decks right now, if you splash, you're playing Guild Gates, you're playing Evolving Wilds, you're playing things that kind of slow you down. And if you're playing against other gate decks, that's totally fine. But when you're dying to Acheron Crusaders and Cloudfin Raptors and such, playing those Guild Gates, there's a real cost to that. So in this format, 3 colors, splashing in general, unless you're blue-green splash, is just not something that you generally want to be doing. Now, you can draft a control deck if you have enough cheap removal. Like I just drafted an amazing Grixis control deck with triple Dreadbore with good mana, but that's kind of the rarity, right? Like you need to make sure that your mana works and you have a bunch of good, cheap, efficient removal. If you just try to draft kind of this 3-color monstrosity where you're not going to be able to cast some of your spells until turn 4, turn 5, that comes at a really big cost. And so in general, you want to be kind of staying in your lanes, unless you're drafting the District Guide Gates deck where it's kind of a necessity for you to play a bunch of colors.
Yeah, it feels like a little missed opportunity. I don't know how to put it, but it is weird that you have access to so trivially splash, and yet it's clearly just wrong to do so. Like, even with all the tools available to you to say, oh, I could just get this card in here, it's just so detrimental to stretch your mana or to try to take you off theme a little bit, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So beware, like, really, like, you should not splash lightly in the format, even though it seems free, even though it seems easy, even though it's sitting right there and you've got the 2 gates and you got the thing. You should really ask yourself, because the decks that are winning are the ones that are streamlined. And a big part of why they're winning is because their mana's better than the decks that aren't. Even if it's just a few tap lands and evolving wilds and a thing or whatever. These decks, if you run up against the Gates deck and you stumble, you're a little slower. You're a half a turn off where you normally would be. Even if you believe that it's giving you a bit of extra power, it's probably letting that Gates deck just creep in and open the door a little bit wider. And next thing you know, it's going to smash you, because yes, you get a little bit of an advantage off of a splash card, but all their cards are splash cards. Like, once they can start deploying stuff consistently, you're not going to be able to keep up if you're primarily a 2-color deck. And of course, it works against you the other way too. If your opponent's playing an aggressive deck, a red-white deck, a red-black deck, a blue-red deck, something assertive in red, and you take a turn off because of a stupid tap land and you never even draw your splash card, like, that's where they can pounce on you. They don't need that much of a window. So really, really be picky about when you splash and if you splash, because overall in the aggregate, the numbers say it's not worth it to do so. I wanted to talk about the Gates deck a little more in depth. Paul, I talked about it earlier, and we've talked about it quite a bit during the show, but let's define it. Let's talk about what it is. Gates deck in this set relies on the gate subtype on those gate cards. There's the full 2-color combo of each possible of all 10, plus the tap gate that, whatever it's called, the guild gate, or what is it called? The one that we open in the Crack-a-Pack.
Gateway Plaza?
The Plaza, thank you. So you've got that as well. There's even, I think, a couple at higher rarity, but more or less it relies on 2 things happening. And really, you need both. One of them is exactly what you'd think. It's a combination of powerful cards that are multiple colors because you can cast them. Okay, you're going to play a decent number of 2-color lands, if not 5-color lands in your deck, and that means that you get to cast more powerful spells on average than your opponent. That's probably pretty obvious. The other one is Gates-specific payoffs. These are cards that literally reference Gates, that say, hey, how many Gates do you have? Okay, this card gets that much better over time. And these are the types of payoffs that you need as well. You need both. If you want to build a good Gates deck in this format, you need both. You cannot just be a 5-color powerful cards deck that has, a bunch of tap lands and kind of get there. You cannot do this deck without these Gates payoffs. And if you try to do the Gates payoffs where you have 3 or 4 payoffs, a whole bunch of Gates, and then you're just basically 2 colors beyond that, or some mediocre pile of cards beyond that, that won't work either. You need both. You need a powerful, consistent build that has defensive speed, that is very much aware of its shortcomings, which are speed. That means cheap interaction at every stance that you can possibly get. And yes, you need the payoffs also. So big picture, there's a little algorithm you have to run in your head for every single pick if you're in the Gates deck or if you're planning on being in the Gates deck. And that is, do I take the gate or do I take the, say, most powerful castable spell out of the rest? And where does that line lie?
Right.
You want to get 8 to 9 gates is probably optimal, maybe 10, something like that. If you start to find yourself with 11, 12, 13 gates, you've probably overdone it. Like, you're going to have a really hard time winning with that many tap lands. I did a draft on day 2 where I had literally 17 gates. Like, I just had all gates, and I said, all right, let's just see what happens. And, I knew it was going to happen. I was going to lose to the faster decks, and I was going to be, hanging around against the mid and slow decks. And that's roughly what happened. But it does hit different when you just literally can't play an untapped land, when there is no turn at which you go, okay, land 5, play a 5-drop. Right. It's really oppressive and bad. And I took one for the team for you, dear listener. 9, 10? Like where's your sweet spot, Paul, for how many gates you have? How many tap lands, I should say.
I think 9 is kind of on the upper end, possibly 10, but I wouldn't really go beyond 10. The thing, you just need to cast your spells. You just need to cast your spells, and even in the gate decks on turn 3, you want to play your District Guide or you want to play some 3-mana creature. So if that's the case, then you're going to need to make sure that you have some untapped lands in your deck to be able to play that 3-drop on turn 3, right? If your hand is just all gates, if you're playing 17 gates, well, then you're going to need tons of 2-mana plays, because you absolutely in this format cannot just afford to do nothing until turn 3.
Right.
So either you need to over-index on 2-mana cards, or, the more realistic thing here is to just go down to maybe 9 or 10 gates. The more District Guide you have, you can be a little more lax. You can maybe go down to 8 gates if you have double District Guide, because that fetches you your gates as well. So that's roughly kind of what you want, but you do need to make sure that you have enough, because you do need to make sure that you have enough gates in play. You want at least 2 gates in play, I think, for the most part, to kind of turn on basically all the gate payoff cards. The one at common that draws you a card requires 2 gates, along with the uncommon that gives -2/-2. And the same thing with the Gatebreaker Ram, right? That card really starts to look really strong when you have 2 gates in play.
Here,
right?
Let's talk
if it's
about
a 3-mana
those.
4/4, you're good.
Let's talk about those now, because so I wanted to start off by saying, how many gates do you want? 8 to 9 probably is about where you need to land to be able to still cast your spells, but also get to the gate payoffs. So then the question is, okay, each pack, so I need to hit that number of gates, and ideally you want to cluster them around like a 3-color combo with a 4th color, I think is probably the sweet spot. Just going full 5-color everything isn't really feasible if you're only going to play 8 to 9 gates. 3 colors isn't really enough. Like, you actually want to reach out into more. So the sweet spot for me has been like 3 colors plus a splash would be, so 4 colors technically, but like not full on. Like, I don't have double mana symbols, really hardly ever if I can help it, but certainly not in like 3 different colors, and definitely not in 4. So that's kind of where you're aiming. So you take the gate in the scenarios where it's an on colors gate or you're not, quite at the level, but also that there isn't something that you really need to take. And one of the subsets of cards that you really need to take are the Gates Payoffs cards. So the top tier of those is Gates Ablaze. That's the red one that does damage equal to the number of gates you control to everything. So that's your sweeper. That's the best one. That is the one that can alleviate all your troubles. That's the one that the red-white deck and the red-based decks actually fear. They you're setting up your mana. They got you down to 9, and then you go Gates Ablaze, and it's like, oh, like that's the one thing. Next is Gatebreaker Ram that Paul just mentioned, and that's your best threat. That can easily become a 6/6 Vigilance Trample for 3 mana. It also scales well with the game where, like, let's say it gets outclassed for a minute. You can just wait, hit a couple of land drops, and then boom, now all of a sudden it's the biggest thing again, and you're back in action. Vigilance, surprisingly relevant on this card because it does just get huge, and it allows you to apply pressure while also continuing to block. And then you also get Gate Colossus, and that's the 8 mana, 8/8 gate creature. And, this thing is surprisingly easy to deal with, but it does keep coming back. If they kill it, you get to play a gate and you'll have the option to put it back on top of your library, which you almost always take, because if you've cast it once, it's hard to imagine that there's going to be something better to cast than it the next turn. And also, it's now cheaper than whenever you cast it. I mean, I've had this thing cost 0 like a lot of times. So,
Sure.
It becomes this inevitability thing in the late part of the game. And that's why it's important, because sometimes let's say you have all 3 of these and you go Gates Ablaze to stabilize, play a Gatebreaker Ram. That's a really nice, that's one of the more powerful, say two turn sequences you can have in this format, but they do kill your Gatebreaker Ram. Sometimes they just go, yeah, cool, Dreadbore. And you're like, oh,
right.
So now what?
Yeah.
Right. And you do need a way to win the game, and Gate Colossus is a really great way to do it. So those are your 3 top gates payoffs. The next tier are a bit worse. Archway Angels, one of them, that's the 3/4 flyer for 5 and a white. When it ETVs, you gain 2 life for each one of your gates. This is a way to recoup a very quick start from your opponent, but it is not powerful enough to seal the game. It simply buys you time. and maybe makes it so that like a random burn spell doesn't kill you. But just having a 3-powered flyer is not enough to be like, okay, we're good now, right? They will kill it, and it will not be a quick enough clock for you to lean on, like the Ram and the Colossus are. So it's a key thing. It matters. I will always play it in my Gates decks, but just remember that it's only half of the battle. It gets you more stable, but you can lose from there.
The issue with the Angel, though, just compared to the other cards, is just very understated. I mean, 6 mana for 3/4 flyer. How much life does this have to get you for you to be happy? I think 8 is probably the number, right? 4 is pretty bad. 6 is okay. And then 8, you're like, okay, 8's okay. And still at the end of the day, this is something that needs to complement whatever other way you want to win the game with, because a 6 mana 3/4 flyer is just not going to get it done. You'll still play it, but another thing is oftentimes you're not necessarily wanting to be a heavy white base. A lot of the white cards in this format are kind of aggressive. So you're kind of splashing for the Angel sometimes in a lot of instances, whereas the color combination that seems to be doing the best for the 4-color decks is some kind of Jund variation. Because when you're playing all the tap lands, the red and black give you all the good removal, right? Being able to play that Wild Slash while you're playing your tap lands, or playing Obnixilus's Cruelty or Dreadbore is kind of where you want to be, and then you play all the other cards. Whereas with the Angel, it's like, what other white card are you playing? Compulsory Rest, I guess, maybe. Heliod's Pilgrim for some more compulsory rests, but that's basically it. Because you're not playing Ardenvale Tacticians in your 4 or 5 color gate deck. Exactly.
And you're passing a lot of those, what would be normally very desirable white cards. Next, still in the same grouping here, is the Ubulsar Gatekeepers. That's the -2/-2 for it's 2 and a 3 and a black for a 2/4. That can help. Right. That's the type of card that can say, okay, pick off something and leave a 2/4 blocker. That can leave these aggressive quick starts with, a bit of a speed bump in their way. So that's on your radar. And then I have used this. I have yet to determine where this actually fits, but Guild Summit, the 2 and a blue. And when it ETBs, you can tap any number of gates and draw that many cards. And then whenever a gate ETBs, you draw a card. I mean, I've used it to completely fuel the late game. It's hard to deal with. It's an enchantment. It's annoying for them. It feeds itself, right? Like you play a gate, you draw a card. Now you draw a card for the turn. You're more likely to have drawn another gate to play, and then it sort of just keeps flowing. Doesn't gain you life, doesn't help stabilize you in that way. So, but it is powerful. I mean, this is the type of thing that, you can use to really turbo through the late game. You get to turn 6, you play Summit, draw 3, say go, play a gate, draw a card, and you've got, all this mana, all these, resources available to you. I would only want one. Like, I don't ever really want to see a second Guild Summit in my hand or whatever, but, it can be a way to go.
Yeah, I think the big issue with this card is because you're already playing a deck that's inherently slower because of all the tap lands, you just kind of run into an instance where you just can't play this a lot of the time, or sometimes it's the last card that you play because you're just desperately trying to stay relevant to the board. You're casting your removal spells, but in the late game, you can fuel this up. And then of course, if you ever play against another control deck, this is that the mid-range / control mirror breaker, right? If you ever just get this in play, just play it on turn 3, you're going to win the game. You're just going to draw so many cards. It's just, this is one of those kind of polarizing cards where when you play against a red aggro decks, it's pretty bad. And then when you play against anything else, it's going to be one of the better cards in your deck.
Yeah, the gate mirror breaker in many ways. And then the last payoff is the Opal Lake Gatekeepers. That's the 3 and a blue 2/4. And when it ETBs, if you control 2 gates, you draw a card. It's fine. This is the bottom tier of these. Like, you can just not play this card. Don't worry about it. Even if you have it in your pool, and even if you're blue and playing gates, you could just say no. If you have something more efficient or better, if you do put it in your deck, that's fine too. It basically will always cantrip and leave behind a reasonable defensive body. But the problem is just efficiency, right? It's just like, you really need to stop what your opponent's doing. That's why the Ubulsar Gatekeepers are better than the Opal Lake. And generally speaking, finding ways to draw cards and use your mana in the Gates deck isn't actually that hard. That's why the Guild Summit and the Opal Lake are both kind of on the lower end.
Right. That's the thing. Like, when you're drafting the Gates deck, you kind of prioritize, like you said, there's a tier list of the A tier payoffs, right? All the gate payoffs. You're taking all of them over all the gates, any of the gates, right? You're just taking all of those, and then you have to make the choice between removal spell versus gate. How good is a removal spell versus how many gates do I actually need? And then it's just like that. There's a priority list, and it's gate payoffs, removal spells, and then way at the end, it's card draw. And you just don't have to prioritize it very much. There's a lot of different ways to get ahead on cards in this format. There's Read the Bones, there's the Gatekeepers, there's a Guild Summit, there's Treasure Cruise. One of them will just kind of fall into your lap. So you just never have to worry about an effect like this. And this, like you said, far worse than the Ubulsar Gatekeepers, because that's a card that actually helps you when you're behind. Whereas this one just gets you another card that you might not even be able to cast.
That's right. And then, so those are the gate payoffs versus the gates. And then, of course, there's, take your pick of powerful, upper rarity, gold, castable cards, right? I mean, one that comes to mind is like Pia and Kieran Nalaar, right? Like that's a great way to stabilize a board, right? That's a really, that's a thing that you go, okay, I'm in the gates deck. I'm going to take that card and I'm going to do the thing. Elspeth Sun's Champion, right? These are cards that are like great at stabilizing. They're expensive. They're mana intensive, but they actually pay you off and they let you go. And then, Paul,
I got one for you.
One other card.
I'm glad you saved this one for me, Marshall. This is insane, by the way. But the best card in all of Pioneer Masters so far, when it comes to games in hand win rate, is Chromanticore.
Yeah, boy.
Hell yeah.
That's the one right there, man. Chromanticore, if you've never seen it, is Wooburg. Like it costs one of each color. It's an enchantment creature Manticore. It has Bestow for Wooburg plus 2 extra mana. And it's a 4/4 flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, lifelink. So just sort of go down the Wooburg, pick a classic ability of that color, right? Like green is the trample, lifelink is white, or whatever. Or maybe red's the trample. Yeah, red's the trample, lifelink is the green. First strike is the white. No, flying's the blue, and vigilance is. Wait, what is it?
You need to talk with Mark Rosewater and try to figure out.
No, I need to talk with Ryan
green
Spain.
The vigilance and black the flying.
No, Ryan designed this card. Like Ryan actually was the one behind Chromanticore when he worked at Wizards directly. Right. So he's got to be so stoked. I'm actually going to have dinner with him tonight. So I am going to I have a signed one from him. Like I'm going to be like, dude, did you know Chromanticore is literally the best card in Pioneer Masters? I mean, what does this tell you though, Paul? Because this is wild, right? Like there's no way this should be the best card. This should be the best card when resolved. This should never be the best card in the set.
So this is what this tells me. Number one, that the mana fixing in this format is excellent, right? To be able to pull this off and win this many times when you put it in your deck, it means that most decks that can play this just have really good mana. And that means you can actually pull this off a good amount of the time because it's played in roughly half of the decks that you draft this card in, which is a lot for a 5-color card, right? So that's what it tells me. Number two, this is the perfect type of card in your gate deck because this is the card that Archway Angel wanted to be. Right?
Yes,
because this is the card that lets you stabilize when you're behind. When you pay the 7 mana here, it's a hefty cost for sure. But when you pay the 7 mana, you basically have created your own Sire of 7 Deaths. Right?
Yep.
You created this unstoppable flying lifelink monster that has vigilance. You hit them, and then you gain the life back. And then if they kill your creature, guess what? You still have a Baneslayer Angel in play. Right. So it's basically a double Baneslayer Angel. And that's what makes this card so powerful. Actually, the first 5-color deck that I drafted, I actually tried to force the Gates deck. I was like, I'm going to take Gates, I'm going to take Gates, I'm going to take Gates. And ultimately, Gates wasn't open.
Oh, no.
I had a bunch of Gates, but I didn't have that many of the payoffs. I had like 3 payoffs. But what I did have was Chromanticore, Kiora, and Sarkin. Sarkin, the Planeswalker. So it was just a Super Friends, all rares, 5-color deck. And I was able to still pull it off, and I won almost every single game with Chromanticore.
That's
like
incredible.
If you ever just cast this thing and can draft your deck. Of course, I drafted around it. I made sure I can survive the early game. But when you do, and you resolve this card, this thing's just going to win you the game. Yeah. It just full stop. Plays offense, defense, gains you life. If they kill your creature, you still get a Chromanticore in play, which is still going to be really, really tough to deal with.
Yeah.
I can't believe it's number 1.
I'm really shocked that it's number one, but like you said, it does do everything you want, and there's no situation in which it's bad. I mean, if you have a random tutu, you throw this thing on it, it's going to do work. And again, it does all the things. It closes out the game quickly. It's hard to deal with. It's a sticky threat. So like, even if you're playing in the mirror match, they're going to have a hard time. And then of course, if you're playing against an aggressive deck and you manage to land Chromanticore on something at bestow, you get to attack right then. And there's just, there's no coming back. It's not blockable in a profitable way. It has first strike. The trample's nice, but like that's probably the weakest of all the things. Really, it's the combination of huge lifelink vigilance. Like that is so tough for any of those decks to beat. You put first strike on it and it just makes it basically unblockable flying. I mean, it's
can't
just
race this card ever.
Yeah. I mean, those are really the only thing I think that you would choose is, if you could change one, for the, for maximizing in limited or whatever, would be instead of trample, you would give it some type of ward ability or something like that, like make it even harder to mess with. But I mean, I'm nitpicking, obviously the card's awesome. I'm still just absolutely shocked that a Wooburg card is performing the best out of anything in the set, but I would have bet a lot of money like P and Kieran Alar would be better,
Or Elspeth Sun's Champion.
Right. Because Elspeth Sun's Champion does similar where like if you're ahead, it closes out the game really quickly. If you're at parity, it blows the game wide open. If you're behind, it stabilizes you either by sweeping away their big stuff or just making an army of blockers on the ground. And it's so much easier to cast. I mean, so much easier. But I think my takeaway is yours, Paul. It's just the fixing so good in the format. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, man. I'm not a big fan of the format
or Chromanticore.
I love Chromanticore. I love Chromanticore, but Pioneer Masters has fallen flat for me pretty quickly. I did a bunch of drafts and I was like trying to convince myself that I was having fun and that like, cause I love the Gates deck. I mean, I'll kind of do that in any format I can, but when everybody else is playing it, it definitely loses some luster. It feels muddy. Playing the Gates deck, like there's a lot of just, did I get lucky and get the Gates payoffs? And then, as long as I understand that I need to be quick with my defense, I need to have, cheap interactive stuff and make sure my mana isn't like crazy bad. Then you kind of just end up with what you end up with. I don't like formats, that push hyper aggression where like the gloves are off, where it's just like, what is the cheapest, there's no bottom to how cheap and effective I will try to go. Like those formats don't usually play that well for me in the gameplay part. They're kind of interesting in the draft, but it leads, I mean, if you've ever played a game on either side of being red, white versus the Gates deck, like it's not that fun for either player. Like it's kind of just like, okay, well, the red white deck just has to kind of dump its hand and do its thing. And then it's like, well, I hope they don't have Gates ablaze. And they had it, the game's over. Oh, they didn't have it, I win. There's just not a lot of interaction going there. It feels like two ships kind of sailing by each other in the night. And that doesn't lead to that much interesting stuff. And then, one thing that kept happening over and over to me during the draft portion that I was just like, why does this keep happening? Is that like, I would try to grab onto a 2-color archetype and be like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And the early picks of it were like in line with the archetype and they felt like good. And like, okay, I got a direction here. But then it just felt like I would hit the, say, 4th pick, maybe 5th. And for the entire rest of the pack, even if I opened up cards that were in my colors at common and uncommon that, you'd think would be making up the rest of the archetype, the cards that I saw just had nothing to do with what I was doing. And they were mediocre, and I'm just going like, where's my handhold here? Like, where's my, where's my not payoffs in the sense of like, I open some sick uncommon payoff, just where's my like mediocre common, but that just fits the bill, that actually lines up with what I'm doing. And there's a few archetypes that are supported in that way. Blue-white flyers, I think, is one of them, that comes to mind where like you can start to see like, okay, fine, maybe Philology Archaeologist isn't that good in blue-white flyers or whatever, but you're like, okay, I could get a late Cloud Cloudfin Raptor, or like a mediocre flyer, like a Nimbus Naiad, right? You're like, okay, sure. Like these are just the type of cards to me that kind of just fill out those type of things. And instead I'm seeing like top crop skirmishers and ingenious scobs and stuff like that are like, I guess those are for somebody else, like, because they don't go into this deck. But the problem is every deck I'm in, I feel like there's this glut of commons near the end that just don't feel like they fit into the deck at all. Like, I'm just not going to put like random top crop skirmishers in my deck and be happy about it. I will put them in there because I need to hit playables, but like, I'm not going to put them in and be like, yay. If I see that type of card, I want to be doing something with it. I want to be discarding it for value, or I want to be recurring it or doing something interesting, with those. And instead they feel like pure filler to me. Like they honestly feel like how you would think a full reprint set would play out for limited. It's just they normally don't. And this one has been like that. And it's led me, like I went back to Foundations. I started drafting Foundations again. Like I think Pioneer Masters, at least at this stage, just doesn't feel like a fully fleshed out format to me. And it left me feeling pretty disappointed, and I kind of ran away from it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have also been kind of shifting back and forth between Foundations and Pioneer Masters. I'm trying to get a gauge for what the
what do
audience
people want to watch on your YouTube
see.
channel? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I feel like I'm getting a slightly more views in the Foundations videos, which I think makes sense because Pioneer Masters is just not something you can play in real life. And there's going to be a good chunk of my audience that watches my videos so that they can take the skills that they learn and apply that to their F&M drafts or their real life drafts. And you just can't do that with Pioneer Masters, which makes it slightly less relatable. So it's kind of close. I'm doing okay with the Pioneer Masters stuff too, but I think more people have been preferring the Foundations. I've been kind of going back and forth, 2 and 2. Okay. But I kind of get what you're saying with a lot of things. I think particularly, like, I feel like the only color combination that they really got right was just all the red and white aggressive heroic stuff. And it feels like there's no shortage of playables when you're playing red and white. Just everything targets, everything's cheap, and there's removal and there's tricks. And that's all that red and white kind of have to offer. But then when you look at blue, you look at some of these cards, you're just like, why are these even options? Or you look at black and you're like, what is this Return Centaur or Commune with the Gods doing when I could just be drafting a perfect curve red-white aggro deck? Or a red-black deck that has a million removal spells that can put pressure on you while just killing every single creature that you can play with Obnix, Alyssa's Cruelty, and Dreadbore. So yeah, I do feel like there are certain color combinations that just didn't get anything. Blue-green just doesn't make sense to me. And additionally, black-green also just looks kind of underwhelming. So there are just certain entire archetypes that don't quite work as well. I have still been having some fun, but I've been getting pretty lucky, Marshall. I've been opening or getting past some pretty fun build-aroundy type rares. I had a draft where I was looking to be the flyer deck. I'm not sure, but I had a bunch of Cloudfin Raptors, and I wasn't sure what my second color was going to be. And then in pack 2, I got past the Master of Waves. And I was like, okay,
nice.
Well, I have direction. And then I got past another Master of Waves. And then all of a sudden I got to draft just the most insane mono blue splash red for some removal devotion deck, right? And it was cool to be able to do something like that, have a draft experience that I'll never be able to replicate because who gets double Master of Waves in their draft decks? And it was cool to be able to do that.
That is cool.
I wish there was more opportunities to do that in some base level sets as well. It would be cool to have just a card that if you live the dream, you can pull it off. And so I was able to do more stuff like that. I've opened some Planeswalkers. I drafted the Chromanticore deck with some Planeswalkers. So I guess I probably have drafted this format maybe less than you have just because I've been ping-ponging back and forth with Foundations. But I have been pretty fortunate in my play experiences because of, I think, some of the rares that I've gotten. But I have had also some bad decks where it's just a bunch of commons and uncommons that don't happen to be red-white aggro or red-black. And I'm like, I'm not having very much fun drafting, and my deck also doesn't play out very well. And I'm just getting run over, or my opponents are going over the top of me at the same time. So even some of the control mirrors get kind of long and grindy, and you're just like, all right, who casts more treasure cruises?
Right.
All right, I guess you won. Or you cast Possess Scob and got back your card draw spell. And like you said, like the Gates Mirror also is like that, where it's like who drew more payoffs, and whoever has more. Usually, it's the Gate Colossus that kind of breaks it open.
That's usually the
like
inevitability. Yeah.
Whoever found the Colossus or drew more cards usually kind of comes out on top. So I'm having a decent amount of fun with it, but I think I prefer Foundations overall. Just with, which is kind of surprising because when Foundations first came out, I was like, "Oh no, Marshall!"
I know.
Like, is this? Are we going to be dealing with Foundations for many, many, many months?
That's going to be rough, right? Long winter. Yeah.
And it really has been. It exceeded my expectations for the set. So what they were trying to accomplish, I think they did a really, really great job.
Me too. And going back to it felt really good, which I was surprised by. Foundations just has enough of those build arounds in there too. They're audacious, right? Like that cycle that we
Rite of the Dragon Caller.
Right, Rite of the Dragon Caller and the replication, the blue one.
Right.
Which are just like, I know that they're not optimal to play, but man, there's some really cool stuff, and you can win some games with them. Like, you don't feel like a complete idiot for doing it. You just feel like kind of an idiot, and that's my zone. That's where I want to live, and I just don't see that
kind
happening.
Of an idiot.
Yeah, just kind of an idiot. I don't see that happening in Pioneer Masters. Maybe I just need to open more Chromanticore. I mean, I haven't even opened one yet, so I've got a white whale to chase.
This podcast,
no
so
yeah, no kidding. Now everybody knows how good it is. I didn't even know it was that good.
I didn't either. I did a double take when I saw it. I said, "Did I just sort this wrong? Did I put this on like cards that never get played? Is this what's going on?" No
kidding.
It's played in 73% of decks, and it's got the highest win rate. That is wild.
Incredible. All right, well, let's call it a show there. Let us know your thoughts on Pioneer Masters. I am curious how it's resonating with the community. My guess is it will check the box for what it's meant to do, which is get those cards into Pioneer on Arena and kind of fill that out, and that it'll be close enough as a draft format, but that it won't be one that people will, run back to or go, "Oh man, Pioneer, that was the best one," or whatever. I think it's going to be a little bit of just a checkbox as far as the limited part goes. That's my guess right now. It's still early though, and things change. I felt the same way about Foundations. I was worried that in the same way that you were, Paul, but now I've really come around on it, and I think it's a super solid set, and I'm really actually quite impressed by the depth that it's had. So maybe that same thing can happen with Pioneer Masters. Who knows? If you want to find us on social media, Marshall_LR, and Paul is Haumph pretty much everywhere. You can find Paul's YouTube channel in the show notes below. You can just check out the description and you'll see a link to his YouTube channel. Make sure you get subscribed and check out his daily draft content. If you want to watch one of the best limited players going, you can see him draft Pioneer Masters, Foundations, and Paul will walk you through his picks and his plays so that you get an idea to kind of put yourself into his shoes and to figure out how he's approaching these scenarios. And you can contrast that with your own to try to get better, as we all want to do, in our Magic journey. We want to thank Ultimate Guard as well as our patrons for supporting the show. Thank you very much. And you can find everything related to the podcast over at lrcast.com. That's going to do it for this one. We will see you next week. So, Paul, we got to rank the food that we got in Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
So let's not
top
put
three?
Lotus. Yeah, let's do top three. Let's not put Lotus on it because, as you said, this is a staple, right? Lotus of Siam,
right?
One of the best Thai food places you can get. We go there every single time. It is fantastic, but we've been going there for a lot of years. And so let's talk about some of the others. So one we have to put on at least in contention is the beef noodle soup that you talked about.
Shang's Artisan Noodles, I believe, might be the name of the place. And we went into that place and we were talking about, you knew that, when a restaurant is good, when you have a bunch of like young foodie looking people, but also there were just 65-year-old Asian men who were just kind of sitting off in their own corner, also enjoying the food. And, then that means that this is a good place. And we sat there and I was like, oh man, I'm really excited for this place. And it did not disappoint. That's my number one.
Okay.
But
we'll put that at number one. We're deciding together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Number two.
Yeah. So what else do we have?
Hattie B's.
Hattie B's is definitely on the short. In fact, I would put Hattie B's at number 2. Hattie B's is a Nashville hot chicken, so it's like fried chicken place. But it was interesting because the last time I was in Vegas, I wasn't able to go there. And, the first few times I had it was in Nashville. You were there for one of those, Paul. Luis, Paul, and I had it. And I like fried chicken a lot. And this place really jumped up my rankings as like exactly how I like fried chicken. And this place was really perfect. And then they opened one in Vegas and it was really good there too. And I was like, okay, this is great. Well, something kind of interesting happened, for the watch stuff that I do. We have an office for the Toolkit website that I opened with my friend Alex, and it's over in Ballard, which is like a part of Seattle. And pretty close to it, there's a restaurant called Cookies Country Chicken. Country Kitchen, and they have fried chicken. It's a fried chicken restaurant. And so we'll go there every once in a while, and it's gone up my Seattle rankings. There's a place called Azel's that's, kind of my favorite, but it's like nostalgia reasons. It's good, but it's like these new places are kind of next level on quality and the way that they do things. And this Cookies place has become my number 1 in Seattle. But I've had it a lot of times and I haven't had Hattie B's in a long time. And I thought, is Hattie B's going to hold up? Because maybe Cookies is just better or whatever. It's different, so it's not quite the same style. But I went, and Hattie B's held up. It was still definitely like top tier, my favorite style of fried chicken for sure. So yeah, props to Hattie B's in Vegas for that one.
Yeah, and then you guys, I didn't have this, but I've had this plenty of times. You guys also had Tacos El Gordo.
Yeah, that's what I would put at number 3. I feel bad though, because you weren't able to make it for that.
Yeah. So
I don't know if I want to look. What else did we have?
Marshall, do you know why I didn't go? I've literally been doing nothing but eating for the last 3 weeks. I've had guests come over to Vegas for 3 consecutive weeks. You guys were the last, and I was like, all right. Man. We had Lotus, and I said, I cannot gain another pound after this. I have just eaten. I have humphed way too much. I am humphed out. And so the next day I had to stay home, and I said, you know what? I'll pass on the delicious pork adobado tacos or whatever. But that place is that place is also pretty good. And then the other place we went to was the Mexican ice cream place. They serve paletas.
Oh yeah, let's put that on there. Yeah,
that was also pretty good. But I think I like food over dessert, so I would probably put paletas at number 3.
Okay, yeah. So let's put the tacos at number 3 because you know how good they are, and they were that good this time. And we'll put paletas at honorable mention number 4. Basically, you get to pick like a popsicle flavor that you want, and they've got a ton of them, 25 or 30 or something like that. I picked coconut. You went for what, the hazelnut?
Those hazelnut crunch. Yeah.
Oh, I love that too. And then you kind of go through the line and they'll dip it in chocolate or white chocolate for you. They can put nuts on it for you, and you can get like some fruit on the side as well. So, and then they serve it in a little tray. And so you get this kind of custom made kind of popsicle thing. And we've gone there a couple of times, and it's really good. And also it isn't overwhelming. Like, it's a good portion, but it doesn't like knock you down, and it's not like so crazy rich that you're just like, I can't move after it. It is there. I mean, you got chocolate and sugar, it's not chocolate. Yeah. It's no joke.
It's not like having 2 scoops of Cold Stone ice cream where they mix a bunch of stuff in and you're kind of full afterwards, because the bar itself is kind of light-ish, right? It's like a popsicle almost, but with the flavoring, and then you put the chocolate on top with the nuts. But still really good stuff. Definitely check it out in the Chinatown region of Vegas. I'm sure some of you will come down